Don't shop for car insurance until you hear this one secret. Every day, insurance companies adjust their rates for one reason or another. They are constantly adjusting the prices for coverage, which means today, Company A has the best rates. Tomorrow, Company B. It's just like buying an airline ticket. How can you possibly know which company is the best match for you on any given day? Easy. Call We Speak Insurance. With their patented technology, We Speak Insurance matches thousands of consumers with the top insurance companies in America. We Speak Insurance is continuously updating the insurance companies and their formulas. Call We Speak Insurance and you'll know which insurance company is the best match for you. If you've just received your renewal, you bought a new car or moved, We Speak Insurance will connect you with the best company for you. Today, get the best match whenever you shop for car insurance. Call We Speak Insurance. 855-901-5258. 855-901-5258. 855-901-5258.
Blog Talk Radio. Welcome to Rainbow Vision Now with host Betsey Lewis.
A radio show reaching beyond the limitations of our minds and beliefs into a world of inspiration and empowerment where the impossible is possible.
Call-ins are welcome at 347-637-2650. Betsey has 3 new books available now on Amazon and all internet bookstores. Angels, Aliens, and Prophecy 2.
I keep forgetting to take people off hold. You know, it used to be an automatic thing, and it's very confusing sometimes. But great to have you back on the show. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate being here, and I'm doing very well, and I've got a big night tonight, so I'm really looking forward to all the things that are going on.
Well, there's so much going on, and, you know, your book, I just loved your book. It's so fascinating, and it uncovered so many strange things about Mars. But tell us, how did you get it started with this? I mean, it's such an interesting subject.
Yeah. Well, you know, actually, that's a question I get asked all the time, and really what it was is that I always had this interest. I'd always had this interest in UFOs, and you know, I got into the abduction thing for a while, and I really was what didn't work for me about all that stuff, though, is that, you know, lights in the sky are just lights in the sky, and you know, people used to say, well, why don't you have any good film or video of these things? And then people started with, you know, the advent of modern video cameras, they started getting good film and video. At the same time, the computer revolution started, and then people said, well, you're faking it on your computer, so it's not real. So I just kind of was always looking for something that I could sink my teeth into and that would actually be something provable and verifiable. And and really, you know, one day I was at work at a major aerospace corporation where I used to work, and a bunch of my coworkers were in a room watching something on TV. I went in the room, and it was a video of Richard Hoagland giving a speech at the United Nations about the face on Mars. And I had remembered the face on Mars from the Viking stuff back in 1976, where they'd taken a picture of this thing that looked like a human face. And then they said, oh, well, you know, it's just a trick of light and shadow, and we you know, the next orbit, we took another picture, and it didn't look like a face at all. It was just an optical illusion. And I never believed that explanation. But as I watched him go through the evidence that supported the fact that this thing was artificial, I realized that this was not like the UFO stuff, and it could actually be verified and proven by simply taking better pictures and or actually going there and landing there and looking around. And that made it really intriguing to me, and through a series of not coincidental events, I ended up working with him, writing for his website for about 10 years, and then we wrote Dark Mission together in 2007. And then I kind of branched off on my own and started writing my own books, and I've been doing that ever since. And lots of other things.
Great. Well, we're glad you did. And what incredible information you have in both your books about now Mars, and before that was Ancient Aliens on the Moon. So 2 great books. But tell us a little bit about Mars for those listening who may not know, how old is Mars, and didn't it at one time have blue skies? Well, I guess it does, but fluffy clouds, flowing water. Didn't it have an ocean at one time? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion is that Mars was at one time exactly like the Earth. It was very habitable, except that one thing that people don't realize about Mars is that it is not a planet at all. It's the moon of a planet that no longer exists in the solar system. It was actually orbiting this other planet, and somehow that planet was destroyed or exploded on its own, and that cataclysmic event absolutely devastated life on Mars and the civilization that was flourishing at the time on the surface of Mars. So at one time, it does have blue skies. Yeah, the thing is, it really gets under my skin because NASA is constantly changing the color on their images from these rovers to make it look red, and the sky is not red on Mars. All skies from the surface of a given planet or moon or body that has an atmosphere are going to be blue. It's always going to be blue because of the fact that you have something called Rayleigh scattering, which scatters, light into the blue. And, they've changed it consistently to try to make Mars look more alien and inhospitable. And the reality is it looks pretty much like Arizona. It looks a lot more like Arizona than it does, this weird Technicolor red color that NASA has made it. But anyway, at one point, I think it was completely normal and habitable. It probably had a thick atmosphere just like ours. Certainly there's plenty of evidence there was once flowing liquid water on the planet. And what had happened was that however Mars was formed, it had been in orbit around this other large body, which is probably what the astronomers now call a super-Earth, which is a planet that's probably about 2 or 3 times the size of the Earth, but about 5 times as massive. And they're very, very huge, and they're known to be tectonically unstable and, potentially habitable, but they do exist in other solar systems, and I think 2 of them existed here in this one at one time. And Mars was a moon of that planet, but it was locked into a tidal locked orbital configuration with that larger body. And what that means is that it, just like our moon, it always showed the same face to the parent planet. And at the same time, there is evidence that there was vast oceans on the planet that were at 2 points on opposite sides of the planet that were basically held in place by this intense gravitational tug from the very large super-Earth, which, for want of a better name, I call it Maldek. That's a name that was given to it by the Etheria Society for this planet that no longer exists there. And the reason that we know that Mars is a moon and not a planet in and of itself is because it has these tidal bulges. It has 2 huge mantle uplifts or bulges that are 180 degrees apart on the surface of Mars itself, and that is a dead giveaway, 100% de facto, indisputable signature of the fact that it was once in a tidal lock relationship with a much, much larger body. It's not disputable. We see that all over the solar system 100% of the time. Objects that are in a tidal lock relationship have these bulges, just like Mars does. Only, of course, NASA's not able to admit the fact that another planet once existed in the solar system and no longer does. So that's kind of the history of it. And, the question of when that happened is debatable, but we do know that Mars, according to one recent paper that I cited in the book, in Ancient Aliens on Mars, we do know that Mars's orbit was perfectly circular about 1.35 million years ago, which really isn't all that long ago in terms of the age of the solar system. And that indicates that, to me, that might have been when this event happened, because ever since then, Mars' orbit has been really, really elliptical, really egg-shaped, and what they call eccentric. In fact, it's the second most eccentric orbit in the solar system if you don't count Pluto. So it's way out of line. If it was a natural planet and had always been in the orbit it's in today, it should have been a circular orbit, become a circular orbit a long, long time ago. So the bottom line is it's not really at all what they teach us in the school books in terms of it being a planet, in terms of it not being a moon, and in terms of it not being habitable, or not, at least not being habitable for a very long time. That's just probably not true.
Well, let me ask you this, Mike. I know that many people believe that Planet X exists, could, and it's a brown dwarf, right? Excuse me.
Yeah.
So could Planet X be responsible for what happened on Mars? Could that be the planet that you're talking about that went through our solar system? And it's supposed to come around, I think, every 3,600 years.
Yeah. Well, it's always possible that Nibiru or Planet X did have a collision, with the parent planet of Mars, and that's what caused the destruction that we see on the surface of Mars. But in fact, I don't know how probable or likely that is. If you dig into the exploded planet hypothesis, which is the root of this, which was actually has been really championed by the late Dr. Tom Van Flandern, it looks like those planets, the one where Mars that used to exist about where Mars is today, and the one that is where the asteroid belt is today, probably were in stable orbits. They were probably here for a long time. So it appears likely that something else would have been the reason. It's possible there was some sort of collision with Nibiru or a moon of Nibiru, but it's not really provable at this point. And I still think that according to Van Flandern's model, there is at least one and possibly two other planetary bodies, really big ones, way, way, way out there. Beyond Pluto. So I don't think we found all the planets that are in the solar system yet. We're still looking.
Now, another question that you brought up for me was the color of Mars. And from Earth, we see it as red, kind of a reddish color, but from what you were saying in your book and now recent photos of it, it looks like it's like Arizona, the desert of Arizona.
Yeah, well, it is a reddish brown. It is a reddish brown color because there is a lot of iron oxide in the iron oxide rust in the surface, the the dust at the top of the surface. But the sky is definitely blue. I mean, there's Hubble telescope photographs where you can actually see the atmosphere glow layer, the air glow layer, and it's totally blue. So, that's just a thing that NASA does. I don't know why they still bother to do it. I guess because most people believe it.
Tell the story about Ron Levine, who worked at JPL, and what he was told when he worked there.
Yeah, this is really interesting. What happened was that the first time we were able to put landers down on the surface of Mars and take pictures from the surface was in 1976 with Viking 1 and Viking 2, the first two probes that actually landed on the surface of Mars successfully and sent the pictures back. But really, the thing about that experience was that at the time there was a Dr. Gil Levin who was the designer of the labeled release experiment. Now, the labeled release experiment is one of the 4 tests on the Viking landers that were supposed to test for life, and it came back positive for bacterial life. And Dr. Levin insists that that test was accurate, and he did find life. Now, his son, Ron, was also there working with his dad at the time. And what happened was that Ron, by the way, is now an MIT physicist, so he's not a nobody. He's an important person. And he told the story that when he was at JPL with his dad, when the first pictures came through of the surface of Mars, that they looked completely normal. They were properly calibrated. The sky was blue. The American flag was the correct red, white, and blue that was printed on the Viking lander itself, and everything looked normal. And then this guy comes through about 10 minutes later and goes to all the TV sets that are set up as monitors there to show the pictures, and takes the red, back in those days they had analog red, green, blue dials, and he takes the red dial and he turns the red dial all the way up. It shifts everything red, and the sky becomes red, and the rocks become red, and the soil becomes bright red. And so Ron went up and said, thought to himself, that's really weird. And he went and he switched them back so they were all balanced perfectly red, green, blue. And they went apoplectic on the guy. They basically told him, you will not touch any equipment in this lab. You will not do anything like that again. And these were set up for the press, so the press would get the impression that Mars was red. And they told him, if you do that again, you'll be thrown out of JPL and you'll never get back in here again. So, there is a political reason why NASA wants Mars to look like it has red sky and red soil and red rocks as opposed to a blue sky, which is what it really has. There's no question it's political. It's got nothing to do with truth or with what the evidence really is. It's all about making Mars look very, very alien and very foreboding and not very inviting in terms of us going.
Why do you think there's such a cover-up? Even with the photos that they have, they seem to change it. They kind of erase things out of it and Photoshop it any way they can. Why do they do that?
Okay. I guess the biggest reason that they do that is probably because they have a plan to release information about Mars, and they're on a very slow but sure sort of steady plan. Back in my first book, Dark Mission, with Richard Hoagland, I talked about the Brookings Report, and it was a report that said if you find evidence of an extraterrestrial civilization on Mars or on the Moon or someplace like that, that what you have to do is very, very slowly release this information to get people used to the idea. So I think it's a question of really just doing it in a very, very slow way, and until they're ready to tell us that Mars was once a lot like Earth and could still be made that way again, until they're ready for that, I just think they're going to create this impression that it's this very alien, weird-looking landscape because they don't want people to be too curious about what's on Mars, what might have been there, and what happened to whoever was there.
So do you think a big portion of that is because there was a technologically advanced civilization there and they just don't want us to know that there are other beings out there that are far advanced than we are?
Yeah, that's part of it, because part of what the Brookings Report said was that if people realized that we were not the top of the food chain in the universe, that it would basically make us all nuts. We'd go crazy. And, that's something that really they didn't want to have happen because society would collapse. So it really wasn't, it was really something where they felt like that was a very strong political thing that needed to be controlled. And, beyond that, I can only speculate at their agenda. All I can tell you is that there's lots of things on the Moon and on Mars that have been visible in NASA images that they pretty much deny and don't want people to think are there. And I think it's really, they want the average person to be bored and, another picture of rocks on Mars. Ooh, wow. I'm not even going to bother to look at that because I don't think they really want people looking too closely. But, then the question becomes, why don't they just erase everything out of the pictures? Well, sometimes they do that too. So.
Sure. Another thing, let's go back in time a little bit because I think it's really interesting what scientists and people like Nikola Tesla found. He started hearing signals from Mars with his Tesla coil receivers. And, like Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, didn't they see a shaft of blue light for like 70 minutes on Mars? What do you think all that was? And of course, the canals.
Right. Well, the thing is, what's really interesting is you look into the history of Mars and our study of it. It really is, it's such an unusual place, and there's been so many unusual things that have happened. Especially in the late 1800s and early 1900s, both Tesla and Marconi were insistent that they received intelligent, regular, repetitive radio signals from Mars. And today you get people that are, it was just a trolley, clicking along the tracks, and that's what they were hearing. As if these two brilliant geniuses, Tesla and Marconi, couldn't tell the difference between a local signal that was coming from a trolley and an intelligent radio signal from the planet Mars. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But you have these guys reporting these signals. There was a recording, or there was a report by the Lowell Observatory, which was considered to be very credible at the time in the early 1900s, that they saw a shaft of blue light, like a blue laser, which nobody had ever thought of back in that time. Coming from Mars, aimed at the Earth, for on the order of 70 minutes. And they observed it and recorded it, and it was reported in various different scientific and news sources. And nobody could dispute it or disprove it. And it was actually seen by, I believe, a few other observatories as well for a brief period of time. So, a lot of weird things happened. But to me, the weirdest thing was that in the early 1920s, I think 1921 or 22, the manager, the head of Marconi's private company, gave a speech in New York City that was covered by the New York Times. And he said, Mars is going to have a really super close approach in the 1924 opposition. It's going to come, as close as it really ever gets to Earth. And now that we have these radio transmitters, what we should do is we should think about sending some kind of a signal to Mars and seeing if anybody on the planet Mars signals us back. And he suggested that what they do is they send sort of a Morse code dot-dash kind of a code, and they do that and they create with that an image of, for instance, a tree, and then they do another little transmission that would basically spell out the word tree, and then an image of a man, and they would spell out the word, man or human. So that was in 1922. There was a close approach or a Mars opposition at that time, not nearly as close as the one in 1924. But then, 2 years later in 1924, the United States Navy decides that they want to have astronomers listen for signals from Mars during this extreme close approach. And what they call for is at the top of every hour a 5-minute period of radio silence. Now, at that time, there were very few radio sources. There was only a few radio stations throughout the world, so it was not really that big a deal to kind of shut everything down. And the idea was that they would send up various antennas, including one that they attached in the New York City area, to a balloon to raise it up to high altitude, and they would listen for signals from Mars. At the same time, at Princeton University, there was something called the Jenkins radio camera that was set up. And what it was set up to do is basically take these impulses, if there were radio impulses, it was set to take them and translate the dot-dash signals or anything that they got into images. And what they got was, sure enough, a signal when they listened. And what the signal was it was a series of dots and dashes, like some kind of Morse code. And above that was the image of a face of a humanoid. I'm not going to say human because it didn't look human. It looked vaguely humanoid. In fact, what it really looked like was Voldemort from the Harry Potter movies. That's the really
it
creepy
does.
thing. And it
You're
repeated
right.
over and over and and it repeated over and over and over again. And there's never been an explanation for this. But being a conspiracy theorist, I look back on it and I say, okay, here's what happened. This guy makes this speech. Marconi's head makes this speech. They probably secretly worked with the Navy to send a signal to Mars, and then the idea was in 1924 we're going to listen for an answer. And shockingly, they apparently got an answer. And the interesting thing to me is that answer was a face, because as we dig into, the whole mythology of Mars now, the face on Mars and faces seem to be something really, really important in the communication from that ancient civilization. So maybe what happened was an automated beacon received our signal in 1922 and sent one back in 1924. I don't know.
I got chills when I saw, the drawings and the one that with the dot and dashes, and it's just really eerie looking. But would that mean
sad that
there
isn't a really good copy of it? A Princeton University library has only ever printed or put online a very poor quality scan. And if I had a ton of money, I'd probably go back there to the university library and ask them to pull the thing out and do a high resolution scan, because I would really like to see it, get it out of the archives, because it is very strange, and there's no question that it is, in exactly the same vein as this gentleman had proposed 2 years before for communicating back and forth. And it's almost as if the Navy, I suspect what happened was that the Navy did send a signal and they wanted all these astronomers to listen 2 years later at closest approach to see if they got an answer, and they sure did. I'm not sure what they did with that answer, but it looks like they got one.
So, Mike, does that mean that there are aliens on Mars? There are Martians?
Well, it could mean that, and they could be surviving underground. There is some evidence, which I'm going to put into Ancient Aliens on Mars 2, which I'm working on right now. There is some evidence that there might be some underground civilizations or cities still functioning on the planet Mars. But the other possibility is, like I said, it was just an automated beacon. It received a signal and it sent an answer back in the same code. So we could be looking at a situation where, Mars itself is no longer actually habitable or inhabited by the original people that lived there are the original inhabitants, but that the machines are still operating. Kind of like the old science fiction film Forbidden Planet. Maybe the machines are still working, but the builders of the machines are no longer there.
Wow. Now, I have to tell you about my experience. I had a dream, and it was more like remote viewing, and I think it was about 1976 when I think it was Viking 1 was orbiting Mars, right?
Yeah, correct. Okay.
And I was in a room with a bunch of men, and I was watching them as they were looking at this huge screen of what looked like, like Arizona, like you said. And I saw these structures, three-sided pyramids. I saw something that looked like a giant ramp. I saw swirls, kind of like a ram's horn, giant, just huge. And they were patting each other on the back. They were all excited. And, that's what I saw. But years later, this was in the 90s, I had some friends that invited me to dinner in Los Angeles. And they introduced me to a friend of theirs who claimed he was a computer engineer for NASA. Now, I don't know if this is true. And I was asking him if what I saw could really be on Mars, and he said, yes, there is. But he also told me that there was a large amount of argon gas on Mars. So I don't know if any of that's true. And, of course, the guy seemed to have disappeared. Nobody could find him after he was at that dinner party. Like I said, I don't know if it's true, but does any of that sound possible, or do you know of anything like that, the ramp?
Yeah, it does sound possible. It certainly sounds possible. I've certainly seen so many architectural things and structural things on the planet Mars that it's, there's no question in my mind that there is ramps and things there. So, without a doubt, it's absolutely possible. And I, would not discount your experience in any way, shape, or form. So I would say, the odds are that you are, looking at something that's probably really there. I don't know anything about the argon gas. That's an interesting one. I don't think I've heard that one before. But the truth is, NASA has all the information. We don't. So. We only have what they get.
I took a tour of JPL in Pasadena, and I was kind of curious to find out if they had like a giant screen, like I saw, because I know they have a lot of smaller screens. Do you know if they might? Because they wouldn't show anything like that. All they claimed was, the smaller ones existed, but they wouldn't show us anything else when we took the tour.
I've taken the tour there on their open house, and yes, they do. They have a major control room with actually now 3 huge screens. So it's gigantic stuff that they can definitely project things on. So yeah, I think it's definitely there. I mean, I've seen it. So
but
it does exist.
Did it exist in 1976, though? That's what I'm wondering.
Well,
this large
I don't know, but how do you know you were? How do you know that you were remote viewing the present and not the future?
Good point. Good point. Oh, okay, that's a good point, Mike. Very good. Yeah.
I mean, that's why I'm who I am, Betsey.
Exactly. So let's talk about the anomalies and all the strange structures on there, because you point out a lot of different ones, and you have a lot of photographs in your book, which are just amazing. So how about, let's see, the giant face of Mars, which many people have seen. I think there's other faces that people have seen, like a female version, right?
Yeah, there are other faces. I'm not thoroughly convinced of the other ones, but the fact is, the face on Mars is this object that has generated a lot of controversy over the years, and the NASA guys always poo-poo it, but, they do it in such a dishonest and disingenuous way, and they've even faked data deliberately to make it look less like a face. I mean, there was one time where they did an article, claiming there was no face on Mars, and they actually took the picture, flipped it upside down, stretched it horizontally, compressed it vertically, and then flipped it backwards. So it was, in other words, left was right, right was left, up was down, down was up. And they did everything they could to make it not look like a face. So they've definitely been completely dishonest in their political arguments about it, and they've made it a political issue. The thing about the face is that it has a series of features that really you could not think would happen randomly. Just to start with the base of it, it's about 1.5 miles long, a little bit less than that wide. It has two parallel edges at basically the left and the right sides of it that go for hundreds of meters in a completely straight line. They are virtually exactly the same length. The top and the bottom are rounded. In other words, there's a radius at the top and a radius at the bottom that sort of connects it together. So it's kind of got, a circle at the top, two straight lines, and a circle at the bottom. And the radius of those two circles is so close that it's virtually identical. So the base level is about 95% symmetrical. When you get up to the features on the face, what you can see is that there are two eye sockets, that they are aligned exactly with each other, left to right, right to left. There's a nose structure. The nose structure under certain lighting conditions shows what are obviously nostrils. On the right-hand side, which is a side of the face that appears more human-looking, there is even basically an eye shape, including a feature that looks like a tear duct and a pupil in the eyeball. So there's a complete human eyeball on the right-hand side. And remember, this thing is very eroded, so you're still looking at features that have been sort of eroded. And you also have the fact that the tip of the nose is the highest point on the object. So in spite of all those different things, and I think I listed them at the end, NASA continues to claim the face on Mars is natural and not artificial, but it certainly appears to be artificial, and it's surrounded by other artificial-looking objects all over the Cydonia region, which is where the face was found.
Well, I received one of the photos from JPO, and of course on the back they disclaim anything that it is an unnatural structure. So yeah.
Well, I mean, they've done things like when the first supposedly good image of the face came out in 1998 from the Mars Global Surveyor spacecraft, they actually took the data and they removed high frequency information, they removed the low frequency data, they deliberately induced contrast, they flattened it, they used an embossing filter on it which will throw false shadows everywhere, and they also squished it down, shot it under the worst possible conditions, and then literally 2 minutes after this horrible picture of this thing that looked like something the cat would scratch up in the cat box, was shown on all three national networks. And at the time, in the late 90s, the network news is where everybody pretty much got their news. 3 minutes after, the CBS, ABC, NBC, CNN all sign off, just showing that picture, which looked nothing like a face. They released another version of the same image, which is about 100 times better and shows most of the facial features. So, again, they're liars, they're scum, they don't tell people the truth, and they deliberately manipulate the data to make it look like it's not an artificial structure, which I'm certain that it is, and primarily I'm certain that it is because it's surrounded by other artificial structures.
Didn't they go to great lengths to debunk Richard C. Hoagland about his claims on the face?
Oh, yeah, they have. I mean, again, yes, they've written many articles. I wrote a lot of the counterpoints to those articles, and let me just be honest and say that they are completely dishonest. I mean, their articles, there's one called Unmasking the Face on Mars, which if you look that up on Google or something, you'll come up with that article, and then you can read our response to it. It's totally political. It's not scientific in any way, shape, or form, and they basically make it up as they go along and don't follow any of the rules that you would follow for any kind of standard scientific inquiry.
Interesting. Now let's talk about some of the other things that have been reported on. I wanted to ask you about the trees, the giant trees that are supposed to be on Mars. What do you think of those photos?
Well, those are called Arthur's bushes, typically, because Arthur C. Clarke, the late great science fiction writer, is really the guy who brought them up in the first place. And he compared them to banyan trees, which again, if you look at pictures of these things on Mars and pictures of banyan trees on Earth. And I think one of the best comparisons I saw was to Wayne Newton's mansion in Las Vegas, which people got off Google Earth. They look exactly the same. And then they're these sort of spidery-looking. You can tell that they're thick. There's three-dimensionality to them. As the seasons change and as Mars heats up, it warms up during the summertime, these things get thicker and thicker and thicker, and they begin to sort of interlock, and it looks like there's a whole forest there. Now, again, what NASA has claimed is that this is an optical illusion, and what's really happening is that, get this, what's really happening is that carbon dioxide gas is popping up through holes in the ground and spewing dark material around the area in this weird pattern to make these things.
Oh, no.
And the thing is, it's like, okay, I'm fine, great. Give me one picture of that actually happening. There are none. And, you know, again, they just, again, it's like, I don't think the guy who came up with that idea is necessarily being dishonest. I think what you have in a lot of cases is you just have people that are incapable of accepting the reality that Mars might be inhabited, it might be still alive, that there might actually be vegetation on Mars. So they have to come up with some other explanation to show, to explain what's on the pictures, because there just really isn't a good explanation. It's another one of those things that we won't really know until we land and go there, but they sure look like bushes or trees to me.
Right. Now, how about the glass tubes? I think they look like giant sandworms from the movie Dune, but what could they be, these giant tubes?
They could be giant sandworms from the movie Dune. You know, the thing is, I think mythologically, I think Dune is Mars. I think that this is the story of a civilization to some extent on Mars. I think Frank Herbert knew people who told him stuff or knew something, or somehow he intuitively got the story. So I think that's really kind of what they look like. If you look at these things, they appear to have this sort of transparent quality. There are these rings that wrap around them. And, you know, NASA says these are sand dunes. Other people claim that they're snow from ice flows. But, you know, if they're snow from ice flows, they can't be sand dunes. So which is it, guys? Give me an explanation. Come up with one. And they appear to be solid, and what they really look like, it looks like a glass tube or a clear structural tube of some kind with arch supports that are supporting it at regularly spaced intervals along the path, and they seem to come up in deep fissures and cracks where the surface of Mars is kind of split away. And we've had geologists look at them and say, you know, bottom line, you really can't get winds to do the things that NASA claims they're doing. And inside of some of them, there appear to be objects. It's very tough to see what they are, but they almost look like that inside of them there are some kind of trains or something that are in there. So, you know, the idea is that they might be some sort of actual transportation system, and nobody really knows. Although I will tell you that there's a really interesting thermal infrared image of Cydonia, and what that means is it's looking in the not the visible light spectrum, but in the heat spectrum, basically. And there's an object there called a fort, and what we found which is triangular shaped base, and I think it used to be a giant three-sided pyramid like you were describing, which is a tetrahedral pyramid.
Yes.
I think it's a tetrahedral pyramid that's collapsed. But coming out of one side of it, there's again this sort of this deep crevasse, and inside of it is what looks like this tube with these regularly spaced arches in it. And the thermal infrared is really interesting in photographs, because what they can show, they can actually show what's under the ground a little bit. And what it shows is that, yeah, there is a tube, like a transportation system, that extends from the fort all the way across the Cydonia plain to another object that is mysteriously symmetrical looking, that looks like it might be a eroded artificial monument as well. And you can't see that in the visual images. You can only see this very short part of it, but when you see the infrared images, it looks like, yeah, there's something underneath there that runs the entire length of Cydonia, of the city that's there. So it's fascinating stuff, but the question is, you know, again, we aren't going to really know for sure exactly what they are until we land there and take a really good look.
So those glass tubes are probably massive, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. They're on a scale. You could definitely fit a train inside of them, let's put it that way. They would be like, like a transportation system, like I would say, like a monorail or something that was contained in a tube, something like the shuttle train that goes underneath the English Channel from London to Paris, which I've taken, by the way. It's pretty cool. So that's what it looks like, and yeah, I mean that's kind of what you would think that it is when you look at it.
Fascinating. Now, how about the rat and the lizards and the skull and some of the other things that have been found there?
Well, the skull I'm going to talk about in Ancient Aliens on Mars, too. I think it's a skull of some creature that is not, living anymore. The rat and the lizard, I don't know about those. I got to really take a really good look at those images. I think what you could be seeing is petrified rodents or petrified beings that, are no longer alive, but that have been sort of fossilized and petrified right there before your eyes. So I don't know about those yet, but I don't entirely dismiss them. I mean, once you accept the reality that there was an ancient an ancient civilization on Mars, and they built an artificial structure like the face on Mars and the D&M pyramid and other pyramids that are there, everything's on the table. Nothing's off the table. So that's something that I am very intrigued by, but I haven't really made up my mind yet, and that'll be part of my research for the new book.
Oh, I can't wait. And now, when's that coming out?
Well, it'll be out in the fall, later this year. I'm just getting started on it.
Oh, great. And do you think it's possible there's an underground civilization still there?
Yeah, the thermal infrared images show, like, right underneath Sidonia, the area where the face is, they show this vast city that covers the entire area, and that everything, there's blocks, there's buildings, there's structures, there's tunnel tubes and train stations connecting things, different buildings. So I've actually seen that, and the thing is that thermal infrared imagery is how you would find that stuff. And the really fascinating thing about that is that if the specs on the camera are correct, if they are in fact what they have told us, in other words, the camera is not better than they told us, then we should not be seeing what we're seeing on these images unless the lights are still on underground. And what that means is that there may not be people there. There may not be Martians there. They may all be gone, but their machine, their civilization lives on. And if that's the case, then I think we really got to get to Sidonia as soon as we can and start poking around.
Well, it sounds like there is a private company, a Dutch company, I think it is, that planned to take a one-way trip to Mars April of 2023, right?
Yeah,
what do you think of that?
Ken Johnson. Well, my friend Ken Johnson Jr. is applying to go there. He was the guy who almost made it into the astronaut corps, but not quite. He was he taught a lot of the Apollo astronauts to fly the lunar module, and he didn't make it because he was a test pilot as opposed to a PhD. And when NASA shifted politically in the 1970s to the PhD model for their astronauts, they told him, "Sorry, Ken, but you're out. You got the qualifications. We know you can do the job, but this is not what we're doing anymore. We're doing scientists and rather than pilots." So he's applied for it. He's going to go, and I think it's a fascinating idea. And I don't know what they're going to find, but I think it's going to be really, really interesting if they go. I really do.
That's a little scary because you won't be able to come back to Earth, I guess, right?
Well,
it's a one-way ticket.
That's the choice that they would be making. And, this guy's lived his whole life. As an example, Ken has lived his whole life around this, and he definitely is willing to take the risk. He's willing to leave everything behind because it would fulfill something in his life that he hasn't yet achieved, and I think there's a lot of people that probably feel that way.
Would you go, Mike?
Not in a million years. No, first of all, it probably wouldn't land in anywhere interesting. Secondly, I enjoy my life here. I'm, maybe if the Seahawks won the Super Bowl and I was married for 20 years to the girl of my dreams and was ready, then I might kind of said no. There's too many things to live for here on Earth, as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
Yeah.
I kind of wonder sometimes if we aren't the Martians, that maybe hundreds of thousands of years ago, we went to Mars, and we destroyed Mars in some way, and then, look what we're doing to Earth now,
Well, we might be, Betsey, we might be Martians in the sense that we might be genetically related to that civilization. And it's really interesting because the Anunnaki stories of Zecharia Sitchin, I don't know how familiar you are with his work, but
yes, I am.
Yeah, they talk about crossing them with us, and the word Nibiru is planet of the crossing. Now, Sitchin interprets that as meaning crossing the sky. You could also interpret it as where the races were crossed, right? In other words, where we were changed to adapt to living on Earth, because if this cataclysm happened on Mars, which I talked about at the beginning of the show, if that really happened, sooner or later Mars would living there would simply become untenable, and they would have to migrate to the only place left in the solar system that could support humanoid life, and that would be the planet Earth. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, would be to adapt yourself genetically to the new place. And that would mean crossing your DNA with the DNA of the people that were already here, let's say the Neanderthals. And the result might be something that looks very much like us. So, that I think is a distinct possibility. But it also brings up something else about Mars, which is really fascinating, that I put in my lectures, and I'm going to put it in Ancient Aliens on Mars too, but it's not in Ancient Aliens on Mars. And that's that there was a comic book back in the late 50s that came out that was called, get this, The Face on Mars, okay? And it was about the first expedition to go to Mars. They go to Mars. They find a gigantic sculpted face. They explore the face. One of the astronauts falls in through the right eyeball, the one that looks so real on the real face on Mars. And he has this vision of this civilization of giants, which is the Anunnaki, Sitchin's giant race, living peacefully on this planet or on Mars. And then they get into a war with another species from this huge planet that's right next to Mars. And they are machines. In other words, it looks like they got into a war with their own machines that they created, like something out of the Terminator series. And then at the end, one of the aliens, the Martians, has to fly his ship to the other planet and blow it up. And when he blows it up, it devastates Mars, and they have to move back and live underground on Mars. And then they eventually come to Earth. So basically the whole plot was laid out right there in this comic book, and I'm like, oh boy, somebody knew something way back when. I don't know what, but somebody, it's really amazing to sort of have this scenario in your head, and then you sit down and you see this comic book, and you're like, wow, okay, well, somebody had the whole plan figured out a long time ago.
Right. And, how strange that fiction becomes reality so many times.
Well, I think that they knew something. I think that these are plants. I think this is part of the cultural conditioning process to put this stuff out there. I really do. I think it's to get people used to these ideas so that when they are finally revealed, they're not as frightening and disruptive to people.
Sure. Now, why do you think there's such a connection between Egypt and Mars?
Well, I think that the Egyptian civilization, the ancient Egyptian civilization, is probably very connected to the Martian civilization. There was probably something very similar to that on Mars itself, and that when they came here, they brought some of that culture with them. Now, again, it's hard to know because, we know the Egyptian culture actually goes back to about 10,500 BC, much, much longer than the history books would tell us. And I think that the meaning of that and the reason for that is that they have some sort of specific connection. And I mean, the Egyptians were fascinated with Mars. They painted the Sphinx red at one point. Its name was connected to Mars. It was basically the name of the city Cairo, where the Giza Plateau is and where the pyramids and the Sphinx are. Its name literally means Mars. So I just think that that's probably an example of what civilization that came from Mars really was like.
Interesting. Wow. And I'm fascinated with Egypt too. So that's interesting. I know the Great Pyramid is supposed to be connected to the stars, and so there's so much about our ancient civilizations that knew about the planets and the stars, and how did they know all these things? And what was the African tribe that talked about things? They had no telescopes. Right.
Yeah. Well, how they knew about these things is exactly what they say. They say that people from the stars, star people, came down and told them all about this stuff. That's how they know, is they were told by the star people.
Sure.
So, they're pretty explicit about it.
Absolutely. Now, I was listening to a show that you were on. I can't think of the name of it, but you talked about your book, The Choice, and you talk about a great shift coming in the near future. What do you mean by a shift? What is coming for our planet?
Well, I think a shift in our consciousness, our way of thinking, I think this is already taking place. And what I was talking about was how the forces of physics are going to sort of drive us all to start waking up. And what I predicted in the book is that our government institutions, our monetary institutions are going to get very, very, they're going to be put under a lot of stress. And as a result of that, we're going to find we have less and less faith in the old way of doing things, and we're going to shift to a new way of doing things politically, a new way of doing things culturally, and a new way of doing things economically. And that's what I mean. I think that we're going to go through this shift. It's based on my analysis of things like the Mayan calendar, the Hopi prophecies, the calendars of the cycles of time that were the Yuga cycle of the Hindus. So I think when you put all these things together, you see that we're in this period between 2009 about 2009 and 2023, where we should go through a really massive change, and everybody will sort of waken up and become aware of the fact that there's a lot more to life than we've been led to believe. So we're going to go through that change, and what's going to happen is revelation. I mean, the last book of the Bible is called Revelation, and that's what the word apocalypse means. The word apocalypse does not mean cataclysm or destruction or physical disaster. What it means is lift the veil or to reveal that which has been hidden. And that's the period of time we're going through. I think what's going to happen is the more truths we learn about the way things really have been, the occulted age of Pisces that we've been living in, the more it will push us to move into the open and aware age of Aquarius. And I think that's exactly what's going on. And, I see it all around me every day. I think politically we could not have less confidence in the honesty and integrity of our leaders. And I think we're going to very shortly probably replace the system with something new and better, I hope.
I think so too, Mike. So you see a mass consciousness change, a shift in consciousness. But do you feel that there is going to be a physical shift with the Earth, and it's going through its own evolution?
No, I don't see that happening. I mean, we looked at all the different pole shift scenarios and all these different cataclysms and things, and I really didn't come away with any strong feeling about any of them. I mean, if you listen to all the disaster theory people, we should be going through the worst solar cycle in history. We should have been thrown back into the Stone Age by solar flares that knocked out all of our power grids. None of that stuff has happened. The sun could not be quieter. And I think that the changes we're talking about are changes to our consciousness, our way of thinking. So it's going to be, the world as we know it is going to end. That does not mean that physically it's going to end. It means that the world as we know it is going to go away and be replaced by something different.
So hopefully a lot of these dark people on our planet right now that want to control us and change us, and they're going to all disappear. And the ones that are awakening, we're going to all human up and evolve, and things are going to change, right?
Well, I hope so. I think that there's always going to be darkness to fight. There's always going to be people but I think that we're winning, and we're going to come out the winners in this. And I think that we're just going through that transition right now. I mean, I don't want to get into politics too deeply, but I'm astonished that the current occupant of the White House has the approval ratings that he does, because, we thought the last guy was bad, and
right.
I can't believe how people can say that things can actually think that things are going well. I guess if you're on government assistance and other people are paid for you to sit around and do nothing, things are going well for you. But most of us are really suffering, and
that's true.
We're going to have polarization and conflict. And what I do see in the world is I see a lot of people that understand this and are moving very carefully, try to keep that conflict from becoming war. And there are those who would like it to be war, but I think they're going to lose.
I think you're right too, Mike. Absolutely. I want to talk about your new reality show, Uncovering Aliens on the Animal Planet. And I know I was wondering if you've ever witnessed a UFO, and tell us about this new reality show.
Okay, I will. I will answer both of those questions. Actually, this is really interesting. It's been shown on Animal Planet. The pilot was shown 4 times on Animal Planet back in December. The show's called Uncovering Aliens, and it's about investigating different UFO cases and alien abductions, and nothing's off the table. And the reason why I was attracted to it is for the reasons I was talking about earlier, which is that the sort of the precondition of accepting a case that we were going to investigate is that there had to be something that we could test. So unlike the other cases I talked about, there has to be something that could be put to the test, or we won't do a show about it. And to me, that was very attractive, because I'm the guy who wants to sink his teeth into this stuff and have proof. So, tonight, actually, as we speak, I don't know when the show is going to air, but on January 15th, they're actually going to do a marathon of 3 episodes back to back to back, and then repeat them. So from about 8 p.m. Eastern Time until about 2 a.m. Eastern Time, you're going to be able to catch the show Uncovering Aliens, 3 episodes, all of them brand new.
Oh, great.
And this is going to be on the Discovery Science Network, which is a sister network of Animal Planet. So right now the 2 networks are kind of fighting over us, trying to decide which one is going to show the show and where the best audience can be found. So that's what we're trying to work out right now. So, and beyond that, there are going to be more showings. We just really don't know when quite yet, and whether it's going to go back to Animal Planet or stay on Discovery Science, kind of up in the air. So to answer your other question, I have never had a UFO sighting until I got involved with this show. When I was back in New York City to shoot what they call the sizzle reel, which is kind of a tryout where you show them what you can do on TV, me and 2 of my co-stars were actually on the roof of our hotel in Brooklyn, and I saw a spinning, rotating, amber-colored object that floated into the area about a block away from us. It was about 300 feet up in the air. I've never seen anything like it. It was not any conventional aircraft that I can identify, and I am an aerospace enthusiast, and I'm an aerospace engineer, and I know my airplanes and my helicopters. It was none of those things. It was completely silent, and then it changed direction and moved off. And that was quite astonishing. And then when we were in Sedona shooting one of the episodes that's going to be shot tonight, the episode called Black Ops Conspiracy is going to be shown on Discovery Science tonight. We were out there, and one of the guys who's an abductee called in his friends and said, "Come and show us, and appear to us." And all began, but 3 objects just appeared in the sky above us. I think they were very high altitude, and they were in formation, and then they crossed paths, basically, and went off in other directions. And we had not seen a satellite for more than a half an hour, because the sun had gone down. You can see satellites with night vision goggles,
sure.
But only for a period of a few hours after the sun sets. And after that, you don't see anything anymore because the sun's gone down and there's nothing to illuminate the satellite. So either these things were, they were self-luminous, they were up there, and I have no explanation for what they were. So now I've had 2 sightings after my whole life never seeing one. But now that I've been involved with the show, I've now had 2 sightings and 2 experiences. So that's pretty weird. Pretty exciting to be there.
It sure is. I've heard of all these stories where people see all kinds of things with their night vision, and there's just so much going on up there that we don't see with the naked eye. And it's just, and I know Peter Davenport has been reporting on all these red and orange orbs that people are seeing all over the country. What do you think of those?
I really don't know much about them, to be honest with you. I don't know a whole lot about them, so couldn't tell you.
Oh, okay.
I know Peter. I know he's a good guy, and I know he's honest, but I really couldn't say much beyond that.
Well, it looks like we've just about run out of time, but I wanted you to go ahead and give out where people can purchase your book, your new book, Ancient Aliens on Mars, and your other books. So if you'd give out that information and your website.
Okay, my website is mikebara.blogspot.com, and you just do a Google Mike Bara, B-A-R-A, 1R, and that's what comes up. And you can pick up my books on Amazon.com. That's probably the best place to go get them. It's the cheapest and most convenient. They're available on Kindle, and that's Dark Mission, The Choice, Ancient Aliens on the Moon, and Ancient Aliens on Mars. So you can go ahead and pick those up anywhere, or you can go to your local bookstore. Most of the major chains like Barnes & Noble carry my books. So you should be able to pick them, one or both of them up, one or all four of them up there. And you can also connect with me socially on YouTube, on Twitter. My Twitter handle is MikeBara33. And Facebook, I'm always looking for new Facebook friends. And if I'm loaded up with friends and can't take any more, then you can go to my Mike Bara author fan page, and you can like that, and we can go from there. So that's how you connect with me.
Well, we look forward to your new book coming out about Mars sometime in fall, right? Sometime this fall.
Ancient Aliens on Mars 2 will be out probably around September. I want to get it done, so it's off my plate, and I don't have to write another book for the year. So I'm going to be working on it very steadily.
And congratulations on your new reality show, Uncovering Aliens. So I'll be looking forward to that. And thank you so much, Mike, for joining the show again. And I wish you all the best. And we'll have to get you back when you get that next book out. So thank you so much again.
I would love to do that, Betsy, and thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I want to thank the listeners out there for joining us tonight. And keep those rainbow visions in your heart. Thanks, everybody. Bye. Until next time.